Our leader is over here. Her name is Dr. Alyssa Beck.
Oh gosh, I'm videoing you. If anybody doesn't want to be videoed,
in 2009, when I was first serving municipal council, this was an organization that was interested primarily in pushing ideas that are sustainable for how land use is used. Most of it was stormwater management on a personal level at home, rain barrel revolutions, the type of stuff that would be used in some other areas very innovatively, but new to Monroeville. That's where the garden started, I was telling you about earlier. We were playing with something called permaculture. Since then, this has been sustaining itself. These are meetings that are just the grassroots organizations. We have presentations and we've had a lot of various and sundry ones. However, in the last year, specifically since this last summer, when we began to hear about the oil and gas industry in the Allegheny County, because we knew the surrounding counties, Washington, Westmoreland, and Butler, all those areas actually had oil and gas. They had town supervisors. They may or may not have had any laws on the books controlling how the land was used. Some of the ordinances that are controlling how lands are used are quite old and in need of update. Welcome, sign in. Monroeville had a very old zoning ordinance. In fact, the ordinance has not been updated since about 1984. That's a pretty long time.
right here.
Specifically December 11th, 1984. Yeah, and Dave knows a lot about this because we have been talking to the municipal council and the planning commission here in hopes that we would have a more updated ordinance that recognizes what we already saw in those other surrounding counties and Westmoreland particularly, and that is that there was no regulations over gas and oil. So this is sort of what this last year in Sustainable Monroeville has turned into. We focused ourselves on what was a real need for our local government to have ordinances on the book that protect the health and the safety of citizens, because that's what all legislation on zoning is based on. It's based on the Police Powers Act, where the health, safety, and the welfare of the public is going to be primary and number one. So that means when you have a commercial property and then you have blocks down the road, residential properties, you try not to have things back and forth like spots of different zoning. You try to have tracts of neighborhoods that flow into areas that are meant for commercial, and that goes for industrial. So in our municipality, this is a tiny computer. I'm not going to point to it, but I'm going to tell you that if you Google Municipality of Monroeville or just Monroeville, Pennsylvania, you will see that we do have a map that tells where all of our zones are. And with a lot of what was going on with the oil and gas industry, we began to hear news about how seismic testing would be taking place in Allegheny County. Now, some places in Allegheny County, in particular, were already banning the use of any oil and gas. Pittsburgh, city of Pittsburgh, passed a moratorium. In fact, one of the gentlemen that could have been up here with me tonight but was called away to an emergency, his name is Doug Shields. You'll find his name is on the back of a little flyer that, as we've been going door to door, we're talking about Food and Water Watch. Doug Shields was responsible, thank you, when he was on, it's down at the bottom here on these flyers. Here, Food and Water Watch. Doug Shields was president of the Pittsburgh Council and was instrumental in moving forward what were turned into a moratorium for fracking. We've not been as progressive in other areas, in fact. And a lot of the townships and municipalities and boroughs wish they had, because right now the ordinances that the councils are trying to pass are a little bit too late. And so Monroeville, back in this past summer, recognized that there were industries that were based in Monroeville. and one of them was Huntley and Huntley. And Huntley is more of an administrative arm. They don't get into the brass tacks of going down and working geologically. They contract out for that purpose. But Huntley is very much representative of the unconventional drilling industry. So the kind of old wells that are singular, vertical, go down maybe 1,000 feet or so, those are practically non-existent any longer. What is more advantageous for the oil and the gas industry is what we call hydraulic fracturing. And the unconventional oil well drilling is also called hydraulic fracturing. Anywhere you see deep wells that go down 8,000 feet, 750 to 8,000 feet, they're going down from the surface down to the Marcellus Shale. Anyone here who's not heard of the Marcellus Shale drilling? Didn't think so. The shale drilling can be done in places, and in fact, part of the agenda is to go to certain areas. One of them was in the Braddock community, who had the Edgar Thompson plant and had been negotiating with the oil and gas industry to put a well pad there. So there are potential numbers of places for well pads. They are not any of them in the general vicinity, but they are not far off. And the other types of things that were going on at the same time as the unconventional drilling was when they go down 8,000 feet and hit the shale layer, it's not just a vertical thing. It's that from that point a horizontal thing, and not only in one direction, but in an array of directions. The way that you find out what direction to go to requires mapping, and that's what seismic testing is about. It's about mapping the areas that once the well pad is in, once the hydraulic fracturing has found that 8,000 foot level, where they come underneath. So that there are a lot of rich resources right in southwestern Pennsylvania where they wouldn't be as aggressive as they are. And seismic testing was on the agenda of our local council. Has anyone attended any of the council meetings or the planning commission meetings here?
Raise your hand.
Just a couple hands. And that could be for various things. I mean, one person was telling me here that they were going to be attending zoning and hearing board meeting. Now these are all, agencies. Some of them are quasi-judicial. The other ones are bodies that recommend. But the ultimate thing is the Monroeville Council, who will get the recommendation as to where to go with any of these things. The seismic testing was brought to the community very benign way of saying that, well, this has nothing to really do with fracking. This may or may not do it. But actually, if you look at the iterative step-by-step process, seismic testing is the primary area of where you go once you find the well pad. The well pad must go down and it must draw from as much as maybe, 2 miles?
2 to 3.
2 to 3 even? So this is when our municipal council was made aware by some people in this room that there were some things that they needed to tend to. They needed to have an ordinance on hand. And ordinances that came up and were voted on, there's an ordinance number, which if it was up here, you'd see it in big, but that's okay. If you want any of this electronically, and you want to give me your email address or call me so that I can send it to you, I'll send exactly what I'm reading from, okay? No notes. 2668, that's the ordinance. Ordinance 2668 was to pretty much put things in order in terms of what types of things would be going on with this mapping, with the seismic mapping, or what we call seismic testing. Now, if you read that ordinance, it went down and it had section number 6, which was how you notify people. Who was notified about seismic testing? I'm assuming, okay, you were notified. See, it wasn't on my block. I'm lucky. I live over on Scott Drive. Okay, just one out of this entire audience was notified.
Well, I was notified, but I was notified that they would need my permission.
Okay,
Like it was a letter that they were coming in the area, they were asking.
okay, okay. Were they asking for, going onto the land and drilling down about 30 feet?
No, they were just asking for permission to go on the land.
Okay, do you wanna say where your neighborhood is thereabouts? Is it off Haymaker, is it off?
No, it's by Rivertown.
I see, okay,
By
yeah, you're in my
Rivertown.
ward, yeah, we're third ward off the center road. Regardless, the notification, let's go back to that ordinance that was on the books, that is on the books. Not less than 30 days prior to the commencement of operations, it says, authorized by permit, which, let's face it, they have to come to the municipality to get a permit. And they did that. And then the municipality tried to do something about it after they got permits. They tried to update an ordinance that didn't allow seismic testing. Well, they were sued for having done that after the fact of the permit being applied for. So, out of that were notices for court dates, and they sued over the denial, and they filed what they call an expedited court hearing, and they were able to get a settlement agreement, okay? So now this ordinance still exists here, 2668, to talk about how these things should occur. But then after that, there was a settlement agreement that had a similar language to that. Some things weren't exactly the same. For instance, the personal delivery. Okay, permit. The permit holder shall notify either by U.S. mail or personal delivery at the property. So they gave you a U.S. mail notice. And did anybody get any kind of other notification? Yes?
Got a flyer.
Okay. And
Door.
and that was on the door?
Yep.
Okay. And did it have one of those door hangers, and then did it just,
No, it was just sheet of paper.
was it a sheet of paper?
Yeah.
Okay.
My neighbor on Haymaker got one of these, but it wasn't, it's a door hanger, but it wasn't hanging on the door.
Was it like this?
No,
Okay, it was actually a letter then.
it was a flyer, like an 8x11
8 by
piece of
11
paper.
Uh-huh.
That was under the mat.
Was it under, okay, it was under the mat. It wasn't asking permission again like your letter was, but it was a
It was
notification?
a notification that they'd be doing it. that
Okay.
They gave you a phone number, a call, or whatever.
Okay. This one here says anticipated Vibe truck operations to begin March 21st, 2018. Did yours have like a
Yeah,
30 day?
Gave a date, yeah,
Okay, and it was 30 days prior.
something like that,
Yeah. Well, it should be 30 days prior. And it also says on the ordinance 2668, that all property owners within 100 feet of the planned energy source operations or a greater distance if required by law of the permit holder's anticipated date of commencement of such operations and the type of testing to be utilized. Because there's two types of seismic testing. We know that the one is probably very visible because most of the roads here are being served by trucks, and they are vibrosis trucks. They are, according to this, supposed to be within 100 feet. Notification of people who are within 100 feet. But after the settlement agreement also had a section in it, and both these things are on the municipality of Monroeville's website. They were notifying that not less than 30 days prior to the commencement of operations, GeoKinetic shall notify either by U.S. mail or personal delivery at the property all owners who have a structure within 150 feet. Now, not exactly, too much different than that, but none of these say that they didn't have a right for notification. So the types of things that you have to realize is that whether they did or didn't, a lot of people weren't quite sure. And in our ward, in the third ward over on Helmar, a number of those people don't recall at all. Some people do recall getting these on their door. And so it's kind of hard to make a case that it wasn't 30 days prior. But some people didn't get any notifications at all. Are there people here who did not get notifications? Okay, there's more hands up than were the other. That was wrong. And I think everybody knows it, and they want to know what to do. GeoKinetics is a company that's a nationwide company. they are accountable because they're traded on Wall Street, and they are accountable, and the Security and Exchange Commission makes them accountable to their stockholders. They're very transparent to their stockholders. So you see, I can send you this too. I'm gonna read from this. Our operations are subject to delays related to obtaining land access rights from third parties, which could affect the results of our operations. Now, this is on the Securities and Exchange Commission's website, and every company has forms that they must be accountable for and must be transparent. And they have a section called 10K. This is from the 10K. Our seismic data acquisition operations could be adversely affected by our inability to timely obtain access to both public and private land included within a seismic survey. We cannot begin surveys on property without obtaining permits from certain governmental entities, that would be the local governments, right? As well as the permission of the parties who have rights to the land being surveyed. In recent years it's become more difficult, costly, and time-consuming to obtain access rights as drilling activities have expanded into more populated and protected areas. This is true. A lot of farms, a lot of people in Westmoreland County, a lot of people in Plum, Allegheny County, went through some interesting zoning changes. They called it rural residential because there was a lot of acreage on the farm, and enabled that zone to be used for fracking. So some of those things changed. Additionally, while landowners generally are cooperative in granting access rights, some have become more resistant to seismic and drilling activities occurring on their property and staff, or refuse to grant these rights for various reasons. In our multi-client service business, we acquire data sets pertaining to large areas of land. Consequently, if we do not obtain land access rights, and this is important, if we don't obtain land access rights from a specific landowner, we may not be able to provide a complete survey for that area. The failure to redact or remove the seismic information relating to mineral interests held by non-consenting third parties could result in claims against us for seismic trespassing. So they're admitting here that if they are not following the rules, which was not only in the ordinance 2668, but actually was in the settlement agreement after Monroeville was sued. If they don't comply with that, they are liable for trespassing. This is what says, in a nutshell, that very same thing. And this is why somebody's gonna put this under law, and I've had all kinds of people say, I'm not sure. There's nothing here that's not true. And use of the property for seismic testing and surveying without my express written permission obtained in advance of such testing is a defiant trespass, and they admit it. And their stockholders know it because their stockholders want a return on their investment, and they want them to do the job the right way, because if they do the job the right way, they're legitimately, returning the investment. Any data from my property collected without my permission is a violation of my property rights and a trespass. So now you get into the subject of what are your property rights? And I'm going to admit to you that I'm no lawyer. Are there lawyers present among us? All right. Well, we do have, a solicitor who has listened to some complaints and has weighed in as legal counsel would. But in here, we have an admission that they need to do something that we don't see in action being done. We've had monthly meetings where members of council, I've come up before them, Dave has, Alyssa's been doing this for forever, and other people, and you, who just walked out. We have legitimate concerns about whether or not they're being transparent with this information. They only need to get permission, and it's everybody's right to say yes or to say no. What can be done about it is something that you have to start at, where the original agreement was signed, which is you have to take this to Monroeville. We've been going in front of Monroeville Council on a monthly basis, giving them our updates of what we see and who experiences the defiant trespassing. there are cases on the books, and one of the lawyers that I was talking to, who still does this, but referred to a particular case that looked at this, maybe in another, this is another case. This is not a case that was brought to court that had to do with seismic testing. There was another case brought to court that had to do with something that was called an easement. You know, an easement would be like a Miracle Mile. You know, they put in the Starbucks at one point, and then the rest of the Miracle Mile, they had to agree. Do I have easement to go from one of the parking lots over to your business? And that's something that you can fight over in court because you want a Jersey barrier in front of it, or you can have something that works out that allows easement. Easements are in court all the time. It's clear from what this lawyer says is that this type of a thing where people are crossing in front of properties, they're crossing in front of what is called an easement, but also a right-of-way, where it is so many feet from the center of your street. There is something called a receiver or a geophone, which I can show a little video on, but you're gonna have to squint your eyes because it's on my little screen here. I have a whole video about that, but that's okay, we can look at that online. I'll put that online. When you're coming up from the sidewalk and you're in that front area and you're facing the house, you're gonna find that this is where some of those things were placed. Is that a trespass? Or is there anybody here that may have an opinion about whether that is or isn't a trespass? Because I have to tell you that this is something that's very highly debatable in terms of what our municipality feels, but not necessarily what other cases feel is a cross of an easement or a cross of a trespass.
So I know somebody that's pretty close to me that's a lawyer, we won't mention any names. And he said, well, what if I wanted to set up a lemonade stand on your front yard? Would that be okay if I just went, if it was in the right of way, and I went and I set up a lemonade stand? Dave would probably be okay with it because he has a young child. His young child would probably operate it. But this is a very serious matter in my view. So in my view, that the municipality has all kinds of requirements of us as citizens, all kinds of rules that are way more benign than what has been going on. So in my view, you better believe it's trespass. In my view, not only is it trespass, but it goes beyond that. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say what I think right now because there's a child in the room.
Yeah. Well, in the summary of this 2005 case, that was the easement case. This was a school that was built, and the path leading to the school wasn't the most optimal path. So someone worked out an agreement with somebody's land, and they actually bought a section of that land, and they built a path or a quasi-road that allowed these children to go to the middle school. And then it was challenged as to whether they needed a right to even have to get a legal right to that. They could just automatically use it. And that became the case that he referred to. An easement, he called that an easement in gross. An easement in gross is the term that means that as opposed to only specifically being used for certain people to cross, everyone in gross can use that. And the other lawyer, not the same lawyer I'm sure, was of the opinion that the place that these geophones are being put is an easement that is meant for specific things like utilities. Because when
public utilities.
Public utilities, right. Well, you have a telephone pole. If Duquesne needs to change the light or do something, they need access to that. If you have a gas line or a water line, or something has to be marked, somebody's doing construction, calls PA1, they need access to that. That is what that right-of-way is. But that's not the same as what many legal minds, not mine, but I'm certainly in agreement that an easement in gross means only the specific entity, the road utility, can use it for a stated purpose. It can't be expanded. Also, since it's non-exclusive, there's another term, non-exclusive, the property owner has superior right of possession, use from all except to the specific entity for the stated purpose. Okay, that's a lot of legalese, but you still have to give permission. It's not free for all, for anybody who's doing it for the sole purpose of return of their investment on the oil and gas industry to automatically have that same easement. That has to be gotten by permission, or they wouldn't have put it in their SEC statements in the 10K.
Did the Monroeville government give the citizens the courtesy of putting that on our Monroeville website and
No.
letting us know?
No. I think that somebody brought this up. Who brought this up? Did anybody bring up, I think it was Tom Henningsen. Henningsen was the person that came up. He's another person that lives in the 7th Ward, I think, close to where Logan's Ferry is, Maple Crest, that area. And he actually had brought that up to, the only one that was addressing the questions on council, because none of the members of council seem to be well-versed in this, okay? You have to do a lot of homework to be well-versed in it, okay? Let's face it. It's not my forte, I'm a respiratory therapist. I can tell you about air quality, okay? But this is something that can be challenged. And the fact that they don't bother to follow the rules, but they're very transparent and in other means, you know, it really begs us to correct the municipality in the way that they're allowing this one industry to behave. You know, there may be some people here that have no particular concern if horizontal drilling is done in an area that's compatible with it. And that may or may not be so. Personally, I wouldn't agree, because I think that we have renewables. I'm a member of Sustainable Monroeville. I think we have renewable sources. Already we have the technology for it. We've only to develop them. But if that were the case, look at the zones in this municipality, and you will see that there are none that are compatible. The only compatible ones could be considered the heavy industrial, M2. Now, if I was to bring up another visual right now, I would show you our zoning map, okay? Now this, I would also show you another map. I would show you the map that Geokinetics produced. That's on the municipal website. Has anybody seen that map? Okay. Now that map has a lot of little legends to it. Did you follow what all those little legends meant?
We're not clear on all of it.
Okay. Well, I called up Geokinetics and I spoke several times to them. I spoke to a geophysicist, and I spoke to probably one of the two people. One's named Doug, the other one guy's name is Royce. And they're the ones that get back. Royce, everybody, they're from Texas. And nothing wrong with that. I lived there for 3 years. They explain about where was I going with this? Bring me back.
The zoning map.
Yeah, the zoning, thank you. But this is the Geokinetics map. They explained about that map, because I said, I really can't tell what I'm looking at here. What you have on the map, and I encourage you to go here, and I might even want to be bringing that up here, because I'll try to find that. Maybe I can pass this around here. This map, let me see here.
So basically, it seems like they notified some people, but not that many, and they say that that's proper notification.
No, well, they may say that they notified everybody. But I'm pretty sure after all the doors I've knocked, after all the doors that Lou has knocked.
Well, we know that's not the case.
We know that's not the case.
And we had 5 geophones on our block, which is in this, I believe, the southwestern part of Monroeville, and 4 out of the 5 on our block were not notified and didn't know what these things were. And then they came by on Saturday, which was during Passover and the day before Easter Sunday, which was yesterday, and they did seismic testing in our area.
I heard that.
It was all
I could hear that at my house.
Did they?
It was
I
particularly
think we need to hear from what people.
what the experiences are.
Here.
Do
Yeah.
they give are they getting different notification for if the thumper trucks are gonna be on your street versus if they're going to place a geophone on your property?
Yes, I am told.
Okay,
Yes.
because we had the geophone placed on our property and we just had a letter like shoved
Right.
under a mat,
Right.
not.
Yeah.
So you had a geophone placed, but the truck didn't come by?
Not while we were there.
Not while we haven't noticed the thumper trucks.
We both work. So
Do you know if the truck is coming by your area?
there's no way of knowing.
Okay, because I had a geophone placed on the houses on either side of our property. And we absolutely did not, nobody on our block got notice. And I had unintentional community meetings with a couple of people on our block because I walk on our block. And these two people were very much in favor of fracking, but they were very angry because one of them said, fracking is fine as long as it's away from a populated area. So he doesn't realize he's really opposed to fracking, but his statement is that he's very in favor of it, but not here, he said. And then the other neighbor who lives across the street said he's in favor of fracking, but he was annoyed because he wasn't notified. So I found that extremely interesting. I think it's actually something that can bring community together. You know, I think Monroeville's a great community, and I think that I want to keep it that way.
Do we know where they want to put the pad?
Do you want to speak to that, Lois?
Well, I could actually show you, because the map I'm referring to, that GeoKinetics, not our zoning map,
Yeah.
but their map that they have zoned as 6742. These are
Where
all
is
the
that
areas.
at? I know I saw it, but I
Okay.
can't remember
Yeah.
where I
Okay.
saw it.
Right. Well, I almost want to pass it around, but it's probably not going to do too well. What I want you to remember is when you go to the municipality of Monroeville's first page, and you scroll down and you see the section about seismic testing, you will see an area that links you to this map. Hello, Paul. How are you? Fine, I'm so glad you came.
Do you want me to just carry it around so people
Yeah,
can get a little bit?
because what I want you to see, you see, we have a
Where do they want to put the pad?
well, they don't say anything technically as far as what the oil and gas industry has a wish list to Santa Claus, no. What we ended up getting is a ordinance that was then withdrawn, was that they wanted to put it right where the landfill was. Now,
P.S.
this is-
The property under the landfill has been purchased for purposes of fracking. In 2012, I believe, don't quote me, I don't know, but there's something very intentional going on here.
So you said they're putting the pad at the land?
No. There's no wish list from the oil and gas industry. We're not privy to if anybody came to the municipality and said, Mr. Paul Weldon, hi zoning officer, we'd like to meet with you. We'd like to find out what you feel about our oil and gas operations. You know, we're situated here in Monroeville, Pennsylvania, and we do have some interests in a certain area that has been zoned as conservancy. That was a belief that there was an interest in S1. Now S1, there's only one S1. Now if you go to the zoning map, not this map, but our zoning map that shows commercial and type of residential 1, 2, 3 for high rises and single houses, and you will see S1, but you will only see it in one spot. The spot is in the southernmost area that's just kissing Pitcairn, and it's down right around Mellon Plan. It is the landfill right between Johnston Road, and it is basically here.
Essentially this area right next to Pitcairn here, where they own a lot of the gas leases, right? And so that's where the proposed ordinance, after we had already had the agreement with between Monroeville and GeoKinetics, after we had the agreement of November 22nd, then we wanted Monroeville to update the rules and regulations, some of the fine, crossing T's and dotting I's about our like oil and gas ordinance, which has not been technically fully updated since the December 11th, 1984 ordinance. And the proposed ordinance actually changed what we had already in October achieved, which was, here.
Sorry,
Anyway.
I know it's not a touch
Yeah.
screen.
Prior to October of 2017, any zone in Monroeville on our usage map, it's a usage table, allowed the gas and oil operations in any zone in Monroeville. But then our solicitor did change that. We changed that in October so that it was restricted only to M2 industrial. Then when we were asking for just some updates to the rules and regulations involved with that, the proposal was, in this new proposed ordinance that was coming to us in November, December, was that it had all kinds of rules and regulations, but it just happened to change what we had already changed in October from allowing fracking, the oil and gas industry, to work in our M2 industrial. It actually changed it from M2 industrial on the usage table to S1 conservancy, the area that Lois is telling you about here next to Pitcairn. And we were curious, well, why is it changing? When we didn't ask for it to change, nobody told us it was going to change. And we've been speaking to Monroeville, to the council and to the planning commission. I've spoken to both, and Lois and various people, a whole group of us. And by this last month, we're now in April, so by March, they withdrew. Rather than in the March council meeting, regular council meeting, it was withdrawn. So this proposed ordinance that would have changed the allowed oil and gas industry operations to be allowed in S1 rather than an M2.
So that's taken off the table.
It was taken off the table completely. It was withdrawn, and so it wasn't voted on. It wasn't turned down. It wasn't it was just withdrawn, and they didn't vote on it. So that action, basically, in absence of that proposed ordinance, what we have is two situations. One is the change that we had done in October, that our Monroeville Council agreed to in October in an ordinance of October, allowing oil and gas operations only in the M2 industrial zone, rather than in all the zones of Monroeville.
Where is M2?
M2 is...
M2, well, see,
I can show you on a
now,
map
this
too.
is a horrible looking
Yeah.
thing to show it to you. But if you can imagine a big circle, and you know, a lot of the things that are commercial would be more in the center of that, and residential goes this way, you know, the different neighborhoods and the main streets that cut this way and this way. If you were to make a spoke that goes around those, appropriately, that's where the industrial light M1 and the heavy industrial M2 would be. More in the periphery.
Yeah, there's some very narrow areas in the northwest of Monroeville that you can't see on this map.
I'd have to get a
It's too
zoning
zoned
map.
in. If you look at the zoning map, the majority of the M2 industrial is actually across from Pitcairn, south of Pitcairn, where the railroad yards are, if you can kind of picture. And if you head east from there over Route 48 on the other side, so basically on the southern side of Route 130 and on the east of Route 48, kind of in those two areas, that's the majority of our M2 industrial. And that's by them withdrawing the proposed ordinance that did have a lot of good rules and regulations, but had happened to have changed it to S1. They withdrew that. Then by default, we go back to what we had changed in October of 2017, really only a few months ago, only allowing an M2 industrial. But as I inquired at our last council meeting, by withdrawing the proposed ordinance, it not only withdrew the proposed change from M2 to S1 around the landfill, but it also withdrew all of the proposed new rules and regulations about the operations, which brings us all the way back to the rules and regulations in place as of December 11th, 1984.
What?
We're kind of
Wait,
back to
say that again? I didn't realize
So
that.
I confirmed this with the council, unless there's some other change with our solicitor, with our Monroeville manager, is that the proposed ordinance that would have added some rules and regulations along with, we're not sure why, but along with changing it from the operations being allowed in M2 on our usage table to the S1 conservancy area, which is the area around the landfill. By withdrawing that, we go back to it being only allowed in M2 industrial, which was the change made in October, but it also withdrew all of the proposed rules and regulations that Monroeville was going to put on, because those were part of the ordinance, and that was withdrawn. They never even voted on it. So then, by default, we just go back to the rules we had before, which really essentially were written and approved.
That was written
amended in 1984.
Before
December 11th.
fracking was an issue in the
Before it was
state
an
of
issue,
Pennsylvania.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Now, in trying,
Yeah.
thank you
Sure,
so
sure.
much. Now, Dave, please hop in right here,
Yeah,
because, you know, this is, you just do a little bit of homework and you accumulate this, you go, oh, that's how that works. This is how you find this out. So in our much overdue legislation that says, how do you use that piece of land? How do you define well? Well, if you went back to 1984 and looked at that ordinance, well isn't well enough defined. And it needed to be updated. And when that ordinance came by at the county for review, because every ordinance a municipality does, before it passed muster so that the municipal council can vote on it, it goes to the county. The county reviews it. The county points to certain things that may not have been clear or written clear enough, and one of them was you didn't define a well very well. You need to go back and discuss, you need to really differentiate what wells mean now, okay? So there were a lot of things they needed to clean up on that, and so you see, we have work to do. When I say we, Monroeville has work to do on updating the ordinance, the whole zoning ordinance for all the zones. But before it gets much later, we need to go back to that thing that they withdrew, which was a good attempt. That was a really good attempt, but it lacked. It didn't define anything on air quality. It didn't define why you had to be so many feet back from a wellhead. Does anybody have an idea of how far back you should be from a well pad from operations of that? I know you do.
You mean like your house, where your
How
house
many
is
feet
located,
back
or a
is the-
school is
And
located?
what it's based on?
I don't know.
Okay, all right.
Is it
Yes?
500 feet?
Oh, no.
Well,
No.
now, that's interesting that she says 500 feet. That was plucked out of the air with no scientific evidence, and that was actually recommended at a state level. There was nothing to scientifically study the reason why. There was no data that looked at well blowouts, volatile organic compounds, water quality, what the incident called for on hazmat. There were no regulations over that.
What are volatile organic compounds, and what do they have to do with any of this?
Well, they're all over the place, you know. I mean, you know, you can have VOCs coming out of your home and your soil.
Do you
and
mean like
this.
benzene and toluene that cause cancer, that are put in the fluid that goes into the ground?
Yeah.
Nerve problems,
Yeah, and there are neurological studies that showed, and there was a very good study done at University of Maryland that actually added to the data, and they concluded that that what they needed was 2,000 feet. So you need to really have a 2,000 foot setback. But 500 is the rule of the day, and for no scientific reason. But that is what happens when it becomes the du jour term.
I spoke to the guy who works with me, who has done, well, he did a lot of fracking when he worked for Consul. And he said you shouldn't be able to see the pad. It should be far enough away that you don't see it. And
Probably
that's 2,000.
That's about 2,000 feet. Well, you know, Wilkins Township, our friend up the road, I think has 3,000.
Yes.
And they legislated that automatically. And of course, so anyway, in the map that I didn't really pass around, there are little legends there, and within those legends, you'll see little blue dots, and that's where all those geophones are. Now, they have all the streets mapped out. So if you were to look on there, you'd see the neighborhoods and how many. We're gonna go down Kelvington. How many we're gonna go down Evergreen. You know, it's mapped. They don't tell you exactly the progress of when this is all done. I mean, if I was to believe who I talked to last week, it's all gonna be wrapped up by this Saturday. Okay.
They're already in.
Oh, yeah.
They're already driving the trucks for fibrosis. Now,
Right, but these geo things are
Yes.
in. 'Cause
Yes.
Yeah, many
I
of them.
looked all up and down my street and I haven't
Oh,
seen.
I saw 6 of them on Mount Vernon.
Look for the peanut ribbons.
How do you
I
know
have
what they are?
They're-
How do you know what they
So
are?
how do you
Right,
know?
because they were, the trucks
So
were
the
in our
blue dots is
neighborhood.
where one's
It's
supposed to
really
be? Yeah.
Lois, I
I
think
know what I'm looking for, but I didn't
I
see any
don't.
in my.
did you look did you look on
Yeah, these
the
are for
street
corner, it's hard
and
to-
then try to match the
Can you
street to
take
what the
off
map?
those little things?
Yeah.
So what's the green dots? The vibration.
That's where the geophones went.
No, the blue dots are geophones, the green ones are watching that number drop, right, is where it's headed.
You know, when you look at the key, we have it open here. Can you tell from the key?
It just says post.
Well, this
Yeah, it
is
doesn't
plugged
really-
in, this was on Trotwood actually, but, and they may have pulled them there. And, is that your road?
I live directly across
There-
from where they were.
Yeah.
there's at least one still at the corner of
Anybody else?
Trotwood and Haymaker.
That's
If
diagonally
it
from
says,
where I
if
live.
you read
And
the
that's where
website,
the
it says that
trucks
they
were.
pull them after their operations.
My
but
name is Alyssa.
It doesn't mean they did it
Not
to
to
it
my
immediately.
knowledge,
Yeah.
the trucks have not. Thank you for coming.
Okay, where was your street again?
I live behind the mall, I'm on Madden.
Well, perhaps it's more like James and leading down
There's
to.
blue dots on this map.
Oh, there
on
is,
my
okay,
street.
okay, where are you seeing the blue
I've looked on
dots?
Bellwood, I've looked on Madden, I've looked on Monroeville, I haven't seen any markers.
Okay, okay.
Do you have an alley?
It was on
That's all it says on
the
it.
Monroeville website.
And,
Coast
and,
Farm.
and what I was going
But
to
I
ask.
looked, I mean, according to this map, they're all supposed to be
Yeah, you
in
got
my neighborhood.
Maybe they're not
And I
there.
looked later and I haven't seen them.
Those little, the blue, were you asking blue dots, red dots, green dots?
There's blue dots and then there's a green dot with a V.
With a V. The green dot with a V is where the trucks go, okay? That's the path of the trucks,
Which is like my house.
okay?
That's where they've already been?
And
Well,
by
that's
the
the
way,
proposed-
if you
that's
look
the plan.
at zone 6 and 7, that's the landfill
This is
Right.
not far.
on that map.
So
And-
I'm in 8.
So they may not be there yet.
And, you know, the
Now,
rest,
if we see these in our yard, we're allowed to put them out.
well, I'm not gonna tell you what to do with them, but, if they have no business being in your yard, I don't know, I don't know if you want to deliver them back to the, right up on Monroeville Boulevard is Huntley, you give them a little gift box.
Where are they at?
Huntley and Huntley, if you were to be at the municipality of Monroeville, and that is on Monroeville Boulevard, and then you decided that you were gonna travel toward Telerico's, it would be a little further on your left, right where the, real estate place used to be that was called, what was that real estate? Remax.
There,
Remax, right. The red dots, interestingly, you will see a, minority of red dots. The red circles are where the seismic testing requires the explosive charges to go off.
And those are also, are those happening now?
Well, according to, now, listen, I try to do my homework on both sides. I call and I talk to
How can they
geokinetics.
do that in a cemetery?
They
Oh,
don't care. The red dots are in the cemetery?
Uh-huh.
I don't know how they can do that. I don't know how they can do that.
We have a lake under our house, so I think that's interesting too.
According to geokinetics, they have spoken with everybody who has the adjoining or the land where explosives are. They've done that well in advance, they say, and they have their permission.
Interesting.
That is what,
wait, this is just like they said, they have all of our permission? They have permission? Is it appropriate for all of us in this room to go to the council meeting tomorrow, or the citizens' night tomorrow night, and require our municipality to forbid them from continuing until they do this properly? Isn't the time to do that tomorrow night?
I believe this is what Citizens Night is for. Citizens Night, I think, by ordinance, is for any citizen to talk about any particular thing that they have an issue with or they have a question. Citizens Night is also by ordinance, not restricted to 5 minutes of conversation.
That is good.
The business meeting on the Tuesday where council votes, which is the council business meeting, not to be confused with Citizens Night in the work session, that is a 5-minute limitation by ordinance.
I want to know how these vaults are not, this is the whole Good Shepherd Cemetery. How are these vaults not going to be disturbed by these charges?
I have no answer to that. That would be a question that you'd have to bring in front of council.
Then you can take 15 minutes to ask them.
Yes, Lou?
Let me just say, even if we go to council, we should go to council. I would rather ask the health department about
These
these families
families need to
disturbed
know
at the
that these
cemetery.
is
I would
under
rather
their
ask.
families.
We should get it on record.
Yeah.
But
Now, I
You can ask the
obviously
council
don't know that
whether-
area like you know that area, so you're saying that that's definitely, yeah, I agree. I mean, you have more than one source. For instance, another person who lives at the corner of Route 130 and Forbes Road owns a lot of real estate there, and they called the gas company, People's Gas, because they saw somebody who was not supposed to trespass go and bury something at the end of the lot. They said, did anybody call PA1? Because when you go down with a 5-foot rod, you're supposed to notify PA1. They did not.
That's true, there's no marks on our property.
So according to People's Gas, they told that Monroeville resident to call the municipal manager. Now, Mr. Municipal Manager could be addressed as well tomorrow, because on council's work session, the first portion of that meeting at 7 o'clock, first and foremost is citizens night. Any question, you know.
How far are how far did they drill for the geophones? Cause I can see mine.
This, they only go down about a few inches.
Do they have to call PA1 call?
So
for that?
how?
They catch surface vibrations from waves that are caused by, it could be as much as 100 feet away. They don't have to be only 50 feet, they shouldn't be any closer than 50 feet. They could be 100 feet, they could be on the perpendicular street. You know, let's say you're Trotwood and this is Haymaker, they could be out there, going down, causing the waves. They don't have to be right in front of your house to cause those waves, but those waves are waves that can be picked up by a calibrated, what they call node or geophone, you know. And that's meant to do that. See, seismic testing is done in a lot of areas. Let's say that you got a shopping center going in, we want to see what the construction does.
See, he counted 29 charges in the cemetery.
You did?
Who owns the cemetery?
It's Good Shepherd Cemetery.
What about Roseland
I
right
think
across
that's
the
part of Catholic cemeteries.
That's the Catholic
street? So
cemetery.
I would ask the diocese.
Well, I'll tell you something, the dioceses have sold off their mineral rights in many cases. And if you would like to understand who has sold the mineral rights off or who is leasing the mineral rights off, there's another place that you ought to visit on the internet. And by the way, if
There's
anybody
none in
needs a
record.
sign,
This is all
there's
Good
a sign.
Shepherd.
You have a source called FRAC, F-R-A-C, FRAC Tracker. I would write that one down because that'll show you exactly on the map who owns what and who's leased the rights to what.
Unfortunately, Lois, it shows a lot, but according to Doug, maybe it doesn't have everything because it's become infinitely more difficult to get that information in the last couple of years, so.
Yeah, they do the best they can
They do the best
to
they
update
can,
that.
but there might be more leases owned than the map is showing, but at least you can see ones that they do know about. So
Right.
there might be even more than you're seeing on the map.
Right.
And you'll notice that there is a very high concentration, according to Tom, and if you look at the map, Tom Henninger, the area under the S1 Conservancy is leased by Huntley and Huntley.
It's leased by Huntley and Huntley. So if you're wondering about the landfill and the reason why there's so many blue dots or the blue squares, that is the reason why.
This is Pioneer Park. They're allowed to blast in Pioneer Park?
What, did you see a red circle?
Yeah.
Well, according to, and I've verified this
There's
several
3 of
times,
them in Pioneer
the
Park.
Monroeville Council, there, right now, as I speak, my understanding, after many questionings of the council, is that there is to be on no public land in Monroeville, no municipality-owned land, is that allowed?
Well,
They're not allowed.
this is Pioneer Park.
Well, I've been told if I'm in a municipal-owned land, if I'm in a park and somebody is doing that activity and they try to tell me that they have a permit for it, that they're lying, the council told me this.
Well,
No,
these
they're
red
not allowed to do
dots
it.
are, this is Pioneer Park.
So I'd come to citizens meeting tomorrow and bring that
Well,
up then. I don't know,
Either you're right, or what they told me about red dots was wrong, because red circles is where the seismic testing requiring explosive charges go off. Now, to do that, they have to auger down about 30 feet. And they're dropping small explosives down there, and they're putting geophones on the surface again and doing it that way. The 3 that were at the very end, it's kind of hard to know whether it's the end of Kelvington Drive on Mrs. Hahn's property because she has 13 acres. But way down on that slope, there's 3 more red dots. So definitely would have to ask for permission, which of course she did not give them.
I know somebody had asked about the PA1 call out there. And I know for a fact, if you're doing anything that's gonna be disturbing the ground, you have to contact PA1.
Yeah.
That's state law. Because if you do not, and you hit a utility, then you are gonna be held liable.
And that actually is as outlined as necessary governmental notification under that section 6. So yeah, that would be in what they agreed, not only in the ordinance, but yes. And
Now, if they're not contacting PA1 call when they're doing the digging, then that should come back on the state level where you should be able to call the state and
So-
ask them why they're not being required to file these. I don't know if they are or not. You could probably find that under the Right to Know Act. if-
Well, yeah, you could do that. Calling People's Gas, though, this resident was advised to call the municipal manager. I don't know where it went from People's Gas. I don't know how far up the flagpole within People's Gas that complaint went. Yes.
Well, okay, you know, you have to call PA1 call, we're in landscaping, we know we have to call their PA1 call.
Yeah.
And whenever we call PA1 call, when we call in order, I'm the one that calls in the orders, we have to know and explain to them exactly where we're gonna dig, and how we're gonna dig, and what kind of tool we're gonna use to dig, or what kind of equipment we're gonna use to dig. And we gotta tell them, why are we digging? Are we putting in a trench, are we putting in a wall, are we putting in whatever? So, and are we putting it on the front of the property, the back of the property, the whole property? Is it marked? So, we're supposed to mark it, we're supposed to mark it in white.
And it's color coded too, isn't it? Yeah.
Right, we're
Yeah.
supposed to mark it. Well, then they come and color coded, then they say, do you wanna know the list of utilities?
Mhm.
And of course we say no, because it's numerous. You know, and a lot of times, and all of those utilities are supposed to be notified, including the municipality. So there should be ridiculous amounts of utilities notified, even ones that don't have utilities on the property. And they have 3 days to come and mark the property. So everybody's property that has anything on their property should have a numerous amounts of marking on their property.
Unless they're found insufficient or emergency.
True. Oh, well, it surely shouldn't be an emergency.
Oh, I know, but.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Well,
but you know what I'm
he's going
saying,
to
so
look
there
at-
should be numerous spray paints, flags, whatever.
Right.
Not just little pink ribbons.
I wanna know, I'd like to know some personal accounts of how seismic testing may have, felt or sounded at your home. Did you have anything to say about that?
No, we
Oh,
haven't.
was- Oh, okay, she did anyone?
It happened to our area on Saturday, and actually our neighbors next to us felt the brunt of it. And I heard them, we live on Haymaker, we're diagonal to 100 Trotwood Court, which is where they
Right.
all the holes in the ground.
Right.
And we could see the trucks on Shalimar behind us, and my dog was going crazy.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, what is that horrible vibrating sound? So I thought, well, maybe it's landscaping. I saw the trucks pull out. They weren't the big giant ones that I thought they were going to be.
Yeah.
We had no notice.
They have 2 different types, I think they use.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we kept hearing it, and soon I could hear it again. And I noticed traffic was backed up on Haymaker, which is, you know, we live on Haymaker.
Yeah.
So I went outside, my neighbor's next to me, and in front of St. Nicholas Church.
Right.
There's a culvert there that is falling apart.
Right.
There were 3 trucks.
I had to turn around there today, yep.
No, the trucks continue to go down. Oh, you know where it is.
I know where it
okay.
is, yeah.
But my neighbors next to me, they have a couple of acres next to them. They did have the no trespassing sign up as we did. But I guess when the canvassing was done, a lot of people were not home. So people were unaware. Now, my neighbors next to me, who were in the smaller house, said it felt like an earthquake, that their whole house was vibrating. And also, the guys were attempting to go onto their larger property next to them. They had their phone, they ran out and yelled at them not to come onto the property, and they didn't. I thought maybe my neighbors would be here tonight because they describe it much better than I do. But they did say that, you know, at the corner of Trotwood where this house is for sale, I spoke with the owner's son today, was where they spent a lot of time. So I went over there with my phone and just started taking those pictures, and it smelled like gas, you know, the mercaptan. And
Really? 'Cause that sounds like something different.
well, I saw all of these holes in the ground, and we had our lawn aerated, and I know that wasn't it.
Yeah.
Then there were squares that looked like, as though they had cut and then put the grass on top.
Yeah.
But so I walked around Trotwood and ran into another neighbor who heard the noise, but she too was not home. Whenever the canvassing went on, and she said she wondered what it was. She said the trucks did come down Trotwood Court, which is short.
That's a Kozak, right?
Yeah, we have a police police officer, Monroeville police officer who lives there,
Yeah.
but nobody was home.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was very loud, the traffic was backed up. I personally did not feel the vibrations, but the trucks were more or less lined up in front of St. Nicholas down to where the open field is at my neighbor's own. And they did not have a sign up, so we had an extra one. I don't know. I mean, I took a picture. There's a gas line that goes directly through there. Also behind our house, we have an oil line that goes through. The water lines go through. You can even see them in the in the ground. There's a fire hydrant on the corner. That's the house where there are these holes all around, about maybe 10 feet up from the curb.
This is
that they overrubbed us and slashes.
Yeah, so, I think we have a notice. You were on the Monroeville Community Cares Facebook. Yeah, that's how we know this. Tell you, Lou.
So what are we supposed to do? Well, we've already been talking to council for I don't know how many months, and there's been lying. So we're gonna go back, get that on record. What is our recourse after that? I don't understand, like, I'd like to know, or think about that here. I also wanna know why they're not giving out the no trespassing signs. Why do we have to do that at the grassroots level, have somebody else pay for it?
Food and Water Watch and the Heinz Foundation paid
Why
for
are
this,
our representatives and our mayor not protecting us and not helping us protect our properties?
Well,
we're fighting them, I feel like.
Perhaps that's because they haven't heard enough. And let's face it, you have to register what needs to be corrected in one form or the other. Some people are very shy, and one of the worst things that you could do is get up in front of people and talk. And it's just horrible coming to citizens. I must tell you, you get over that pretty quick when you have a neighbor or two just standing by you.
Well, if your house is at risk, I
Yeah.
would guess.
And you know what? Do they cash their paychecks? Yes, the manager cashes his paycheck, yes.
Who's paying them?
Somebody hired them.
Well, we do, and so they need to perform per the standards of what were as anticipated. Of course, you can't read every single ordinance or know when the last time they were updated, but what you can know is when people do get together and they realize that the due process isn't correct, number one. And number two, the majority of people, when asked, don't want it. And if there's any,
Nobody wants it that I know, but nobody's aware of this. That's the problem.
and that's what I guarantee you.
I'm gonna put that sign in my yard and my neighbor's gonna go.
So the answer to that, Lou, is that you have to make yourself heard regardless of whether it's ad nauseum to do this. You have to, and you certainly have enough time during Citizens Night. You're limited 5 minutes on the regular business night, but yes, you can get up during the business meeting. Citizens Night, though, this week, which usually is on a Thursday, has been moved up because the municipality of Monroeville, and I know this because I was on council for 5 years, every year they have a conference, actually twice a year they have a conference, and this is the Allegheny League of Municipalities. Now, I never opted to go to this because I think it was more of a social thing. And I thought, well, let somebody go and come back and report on what they discussed, because they have subject matters. They also have panels of all the state legislators that need to talk about a subject, and they have tentative educational topics on here. And I kept looking and looking to see what the topic was, because this is Allegheny County, the League of Municipalities. Nobody's talking on this conference about oil and gas. Nobody is. Now, if I had anything to ask council about, it would be, why aren't they? Are they? Please get it on record. Are you or aren't you? We anticipate having a panel. We need to find out what best practices are, because many of us don't know whether or not we're being treated by, one industry is being treated superior to many other industries. Everybody else has to follow the rules. The other thing is, if you're all going to the conference, please bring us back a report on what they say on oil and gas, because you can bring it up as the municipality of Monroeville. So that conference is going on during what would normally be the work session on the Thursday night, this Thursday. So they're moving up the citizens' night and the work session, where they decide what they're gonna vote on, tomorrow night at 7 PM, municipality, yes.
Can I add that in case you plan on going to either of these meetings, whether it's the citizen night or the actual council meeting the following Tuesday, is that for the citizens night, at 7 o'clock when it starts, that's the open forum for citizens to speak. After there are no more citizens that want to speak, go ask, and if there's somebody else, then they, as Lois was saying, they're gonna plan for their council meeting the following Tuesday, and at that point, you can't just get up and speak. So if you want to speak, don't be late, I mean, show up at 7 o'clock. As far as the council meeting on Tuesday, it's the second Tuesday of every month, you were, at the beginning of the meeting, you're allowed to speak on any of the agenda items of the council meeting. If it's not an agenda item, then then you can't speak. But at the very end of the council meeting, which means you may have to sit there for an hour and a half or 2 hours, then you can speak about anything. They give you the chance to speak. So citizens night, get there at the beginning. For the council meeting, it has to be on the agenda unless you wait all the way to the end and then you can speak about something. So there are some rules.
Good points.
I mean, you do have a chance to speak. I mean, some of us do it every single month. They know it. But I mean, you just have to know when, and you know, there are rules we have to follow.
And if things were going as they should and done fairly, we would be talking about the next thing. And that is, you remember that ordinance that just got pulled? And that didn't, I mean, it had nothing in it anymore because they withdrew it from consideration. That was the ordinance that was going to set up criteria and standards so that when they had oil and gas operations in Monroeville, they had best practices. We presented, Sustainable Monroeville presented to council and to the planning commission a paper that had the scientifically based study on setbacks that I was telling you about, and had other resources that had to do with what the court system was currently deciding, that had to do with the compatible use of where oil and gas shall take place. Okay, not maybe, but shall. And for the what? For the safety, health, and welfare of the public, based on the Police Powers Act, which is what every zoning ordinance, which should go along with a comprehensive plan, is based on. So this information, our friends in Westmoreland County, they are calling themselves, I think, the Marcellus Citizens Group of Westmoreland County.
Jan?
Yes, Jan Milburn, yes. Wonderful, wonderful. These people have been at it longer than we have. What they're doing is they're going to the commissioners that are the Westmoreland County commissioners, and they're saying, hey, you have a hazmat plan for how you're gonna test air in a blowout? Or any of those things that are VOCs that are released in the air? Oh, you don't? Well, here's a suggestion, okay? Here's a vacuum tube and this canister, like a blood tube that's vacuum and get your blood. Okay, this can be used by any first responder to go with their protective gear on and take a sample of the air. If you don't sample, what happens during the operations? These operations get going, that's one thing, do them legally, but if you don't monitor continually, you can't see what's released in the air. And what's released in the air should be monitored. And they simply had nothing on that ordinance. Now, Westmoreland's asking at the county level that they include these things so that when they have incidences, why we need new protocols. This was a PowerPoint presentation that was prepared by Cynthia Walter, PhD. She went into great detail to talk about, hazards, shale gas wells, pipelines, storage tanks, trucks, hazardous material, what happens to the brain and the blood with exposure. This is stuff that you don't want to have, let alone, the elderly or the very young, anyone exposed to. And just as we have rules protecting ourselves in the medical industry from any infectious organism, because there's a potential to transmit that organism, it should be no different with an operation of this high order. And so we would love to join our friends in Westmoreland County, and I've begun contacting Allegheny County to try to find out whether or not they even have a hazmat protocol or know what these canisters are. This is what Sustainable Monroeville should be working on. getting together something so that when it's presented, we're not a complainer, bunch of tree huggers. We want safety for what is a community that's ours.
I'm a tree hugger. I want safe air and water for our children and for myself.
Yep.
And I want my government to hold itself, I want the government to be held accountable. And I believe that this is a critical moment in time. I understand that most of the people in this room probably don't know what's hitting them because we've been at this for a very long time. And so I'm speaking on behalf of not only the people in this room, but the people all around our community who, it's the Passover holiday right now, and at the Passover Seder they say, there's the wise child, the wicked child, there's the child that doesn't know how to speak. People are smart, but they've been uninformed.
Yeah,
And so they don't know how to speak, and this is a critical moment because the gas industry has been working with our municipal manager for years. The property that they're having their eye on has been purchased back in 2012, I don't know what year it was, correct me if I'm wrong. But they're 10 steps ahead of us. And so everybody in this room needs to understand that. And I've been trying to be quiet now because I've said so much. Other people need to step forward. Otherwise, there's going to be fracking in Monroeville, Pennsylvania, and the air is going to be bad. The other thing that I've learned, I wrote a few sites up here. There's a Smell PGH app. And when I went onto my street a couple of days ago and had an unintentional meeting with a few people on my block who I mentioned earlier, I recognized that they grew up in the Pittsburgh region. And I said to them, in Monroeville, do you smell stinky air sometimes? And they said, no. I said, well, what about when you go into Pittsburgh? Do you smell stinky air? Because this Smell PGH app is for that purpose. If you smell stinky air, you can rate it from 1 to 5. And then you can...
I have the app on mine.
And so what I realized is many people, including my husband, who grew up in Monroeville, actually are desensitized to the stinky air in this region. I report to the Smell PGH a 4 or a 5 at least twice a month. And if you go to the app reports directly to the Allegheny County Health Department and to a study that CMU is doing. So this, my friends, is the people's revolution. I will call myself a tree hugger. You can call me whatever you want. I want clean air.
Yeah.
I want it to get better and better. People who are from here often tell me, it is so much better than it was. Well, I grew up in Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C. Stinky air is not normal. It's not normal. And so I've been quiet now because I realize that most people in Western Pennsylvania, many are not like me. I'm more sensitive, and I recognize that now. But I was going to stay home tonight. I came because I thought, this is a moment in time. This is a moment in time. Please come with yourself and at least one neighbor. Talk to the municipal people that we're paying, whose salaries we're paying. And I don't understand why they don't. The people on my block who are staunch Republicans, who are in favor of fracking, they finally contacted the municipal manager and the mayor. The mayor got back to them, did not get back to me. But the mayor said, well, I don't think there's anything we can do about these geophones that have already been placed. Excuse me? There's nothing you can do about it? Well, who's going to do something? That means we have to do something. And so people say, oh, don't get so emotional. It's my air. It's my water.
I have a question. My 7-minute video of me traveling over to Geokinetics and they have
That's on the Sustainable Monroeville.
Well, no, it's not.
Facebook
It's
page.
Actually not the 7-minute one.
The smaller version.
The smaller version is there. Well, can you do 7-minute videos on the Facebook?
Sure.
Oh, okay.
You can post it.
So a number of people. Dave, you might have done this too. I was curious because I was trying to follow them around, and I actually did follow them. Where Route 130, which is Broadway Boulevard, meets Forbes, and Haymaker comes down to that 5-point area. If you take Forbes and you travel about quarter mile, you'll take a right and you'll go across a very tiny bridge, and that is the yard that is sort of a staging area for Geokinetics. So I drove in, and that's what my video was about, and I was trying to tease people about it, and I'll just put it on the website. So, you know, my driving up to them, I was actually following him in, and I just rolled the window down when he noticed me and said, you know, good afternoon, and of course he asked me to stop filming, and I said, well, you know, I guess if I wanted to, I could, but I don't choose to. So I kept filming, and then we exchanged some words like, well, you know, do you have permission being here? I said, do I need permission? You know, yes, you do need. I said, well, who do I need it from? Well, the town. Which town? The Monroeville and Trafford. I said, well, which one? And he walked away, and of course, then he gets in the trailer and he calls, and he goes around and he takes my license, so, that's, well, yeah, that, and all, you know, and basically, so then I just decided to take my car and just go around the lot, and of course, you could see all of the things that, were used to drop certain areas, different things to different areas. There's a helicopter there, there's jet fuel for the helicopter there, and then of course there are a lot of the trucks. There are two different types of vibrosis trucks.
Where was this? So were they using
Right off
This
of
is
Fort.
the Great American Baseball Center.
Yes, do you
And
notice?
it's the biggest building around here, so
Right.
anyway, so you just.
Are you saying-
They're at the baseball field?
No, there's no fields there. It's-
Because
it's-
there's some,
Westinghouse
there's something that you're not recognizing too. Last year, right by American Baseball where you go in, we have a property there. There's another thing that you might see ahead of time is wires with these little tiny probes on them too,
I seen a truckload of those go by my work today.
okay?
That's what I just said to
Because
him.
those are real sneaky,
There was
because they were all like,
hundreds of them.
we have property down in Trafford, and I was like, well, in a food trailer, and we live in Monroeville, and I was like, what are those things all rolled up at the front of the corner up there? And, because I saw them and I thought that, they have to be up to no good, and so I just rolled them all up and like tied them all up in a bow. I didn't like them.
They were just dropped.
They were stringing
You-
them out
you-
along the road. and
You're,
I knew
you're
they were
bringing
up
up
in
a
the-
different point, because on the front of the Times Express in June, it stated that they're gonna be doing seismic testing in Monroeville. None of us knew.
Yeah. it
And
was
so
like in my property.
there are different seismic testing companies, and the seismic testing companies do not share information. There was seismic testing done in Monroeville in July or August of 2017. And when Georgiana Woodhall, who lives down there where you're talking, mentioned that to me, I went down and I told them, you can't do this, you didn't have permission.
I told them that, because they came and ate, and I go, what are those, I guess, are you guys up there doing something? They go, oh yeah, that's seismic testing. And I go, oh, not on my property, you're not, I want nothing to do with that. And they said, well, you're along the way here, that's the state highway. I said, no, not on my property, you have to go by my property. I said, you need my permission. Well, how are we gonna get this along the way from that one side to the other? I said, you're gonna have to figure that out. Because I knew you had to go on my property, you know, you had to have the right to go on my property. But they don't look like any major thing. They look like a wire with these little tubes on it. So I just wanted to bring that up in case you see these big long.
Right, I saw a truckload of those go by.
Yeah, they don't look like these big trucks with these big bumpers.
Well, it's a competitive industry, and all those questions, by the way, should be able to be addressed during
But they don't
citizens'
ever
hearing.
answer you with those meetings.
Well, you know,
You
here's a
can
trick.
ask questions so you're blue in the face and they just
Can I
don't
tell you
seem
a
like
trick?
you're an idiot.
Can I tell you a trick? Don't allow anyone to, in addressing your question, make the question go back to you. Don't accept a question coming back to you. I'm here, you're to answer my question.
But they don't answer your question, they always
No,
say,
no,
we
you
don't
know,
answer
then
that
you
question.
could possibly stand there and inform them that I'm waiting for your answer. You are not to take any time away. You are to tell me what the answer is. And if you don't know it, you should know it, and you need to tell me when you can answer that question. And I'll be expecting to hear from you. What time will that be? You know, this is just pretty much like the phone call. The phone call where you're just gonna inform that person, look, I'm answering, we've all done this. I'm asking the question here. You're not asking the question. I'm asking you the question. You're responsible to answer that question. Don't accept another question back, because that's a trick. And it really is an intimidating one. Well, what do you think? Didn't ask that. Didn't ask for you to ask me a question. You're to give me an answer.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple, because you'll find that that's you know, something that, I would rather somebody say, look, you know what, I don't know, but I will get back to you, you know.